Hi, this tutorial is on how to trigger and manipulate samples in the Sema default language. In Sema, we have a whole bunch of samples that are available to use. If you look on our GitHub page, you can see a list of them. So you can get there by, on the Sema website, going to the GitHub symbol in the corner, and then in your browser, if you have a look at Assets and in Samples, then there's a list of about 130 samples that you can use that are preloaded into the audio engine. So let's have a look how we can actually hear them. In Sema we have a concept of a trigger, and a trigger is an event that occurs on a positive zero crossing, or in more simple language, when an audio signal crosses over from below zero to above zero. So most audio signals do this anyway, so you can pretty much use any audio signal as a control signal to trigger samples. To do it in a more controlled way, we can use something called an impulse, and in Sema we can start an impulse by using the IMP function. So let's just have a listen to what this does. The first parameter here is the frequency in hertz. So if I run this code, we're going to hear 1 impulse per second. So that might be a little bit difficult to hear on the video actually. I'll see if I can just turn up the volume. Okay, so that's 10 impulses per second. And we don't really want to listen to this, but we do want to use it as a control signal for triggering samples. So let's choose a sample to play. We can start off with something simple like the 909 kick drum sample, which is 909B. So this is something new we're seeing here in Sema. Instead of passing the name of the sample to a function to get it to play it, the name of the sample is a function if you put a backslash beforehand. So that's a kind of shortcut you can use for live coding. And a sample takes one parameter, at least one parameter. There are some others we'll look at later in this tutorial, and that is a trigger. And when it receives a trigger, it plays once and then stops. So let's see what happens if we send a 1 Hz trigger to this kick drum. I'm just turning this up slightly. Okay, so that we can change the frequency of this impulse and therefore change the frequency of the kick drum. So if I change it to 2 Hz, we'll hear 2 kick drums a second. If I change it to half, we'll hear a kick drum every 2 seconds. I could put this up into audio rates if I wanted. So the idea is eventually you can sequence a kick drum or whatever sample you want to by sending sequence of triggers into this parameter here. If we want to listen to a different sample, we can have a look in the list here. So let's see what, for example, AU boom does. We can just change the name of this sample here and re-evaluate the code. Or well, we can try some different things. Now, you don't just have to use an impulse to play a sample. As I said, you can use any audio signal. So we could, for example, try out a sine wave, which is going to have pretty much the same effect. You could try a square wave. All of these have zero crossings in them. We could even do something more complicated and use another sample to trigger a sample. There's an example of that in the tutorial here. So let's have a look at this code. We start off with a kick drum. This parameter is the speed. We'll look at that in a second. So it's a very slowed down kick drum, and it's put in this variable called trigger, and then we send this as a trigger to the 909 close, which is a hi-hat sound. Let's have a listen to what that sounds like. And for example, if we manipulate the speed of the kick drum, it's going to change the hi-hat pattern in probably quite an unpredictable way. So that's something a little bit more experimental to try out. Now, there's two more parameters for the sample player. Let's have a look at what they are. So let's start off with a basic sample. We're going to listen to this Boom 2 sample. The second parameter we can give is the speed. So if I put a 2 here, it will play the sample twice as fast. If I put half here, it will play at a half speed. And we have a third parameter, which is the offset. So this is an offset from the start of the sample at which playback starts. And this is between 0 and 1. So if I put a 0 here, it will play from the start, so we won't hear any difference. If I put a half here, the sample will trigger from halfway through, so it will miss the attack portion of the start. And of course, you can sequence all these functions. So for example, we could try doing using a phaser to control the speed of this sample. Let's make a phaser here, and then use that variable to control the speed. So that's the basics of triggering and manipulating samples in the Sema default language.